It's a pleasure and a privilege, Stephen Walter Saab, that you are here. And of course, we all know you are a celebrated author. You've written 20 books. There are just about 10 or 11 here, but there are many more you have written. You've written fiction, especially spy thrillers, which I love, and stories for children, travelogues, and many more. And of course, the latest one, The Greatest Game, which you just wrote. First question, this is a sequel to Kim, Rudyard Kipling's Kim. What drew you to Kim?
Well, thank you very much for having me, Shazi. It's a real pleasure to be here. And Kim is a book that, interestingly, as a young man, I didn't enjoy it. It was a book that was too complicated, too archaic in that way. But then in later years, I went back to it. And the adventure, the espionage during the Raj, the characters came to life in a way that they hadn't when I first tried to read it. And I kept thinking that it was published in 1901. And Kim at that point was about 12, 13 years old. So I said to myself, what would have happened to him in 1947? Right. And how old would he have been? So he would have been about 60, 61 in 47. So I thought, let me set my book in 1947 and Kim, as an Irish orphan growing up on the streets of Lahore, now what is going to happen to him in 1947?
And you call this the greatest game. The great game, of course, we all know, 19th century geopolitical battle between Russia and the British Empire for influence over Central Asia. That was a great game being played. Now, this is the greatest game. The greatest game, do you mean it metaphorically greatest game, or do you mean that the game took a new form?
Well, I could think of it in both ways. But the dilemma that he faces in 1947 with the cast of villains that he's up against, who are in a sense trying to forestall independence and in a sense make partition worse than it even was. He is really up against his greatest game in that, or his greatest opponents in that way. So that was sort of really what I was thinking. But I play with it. I mean, if you, in the book, there's a number of games that get played, whether it's billiards, whether it's bridge, whether it's those things. So I mean it on many different levels.
I got the sense that it is also, what should I say, a conflict a person has within himself about identities. Kim also doesn't know whether he's Irish or he's Indian. In fact, in this novel, his handler, the police officer, often asks him, what are you? You'd have to tell me what are you. So many of us who have been through cross-cultural influences, you were born in India, but you're originally American. Your parents, your grandparents, they served in India. Do you also have this conflict that what are you?
Sometimes. I think that people have asked me, do you have an identity crisis? And I'm not sure. There are moments at which I sort of ask myself, do I really belong here or do I belong there? And where is here and where is there? It's always a question. But I think that for me, one of the interesting things about Kim as a character is the fact that he is not only living between two worlds, but he's also able to put on disguises of very different characters, from a sannyasi to a Sikh barrister to a Punjabi merchant. So he's constantly changing his identity in that way. And that fluid sense of identity is something that I think interests me, because I think all of us, whether it's myself, whether it's you, whether it's the man on the street, we're all putting one mask on and then putting another mask on throughout our lives, whether we would admit it or not.
So you do believe in fluid identities?
I think we have to be fluid, particularly in today's world, because there are so many situations in which you have to adapt to the circumstances you're in, the group of people you're with. It's something that I think all of us do in one way or the other. Some of us do it more so than others.
So, just to refresh my memory and perhaps yours as well, your book, All the Way to Heaven, An American Boyhood in the Himalayas. You talk about Kim. Another book I read in high school was Rudyard Kipling's Kim. And then later you say, even though I was born long after the British Empire had collapsed, I couldn't help identifying myself with Kim, who was country born, quote unquote, and grew up speaking Hindustani, playing on the streets of Lahore. So, again, as you say about mixed identities.
Well, definitely. And that idea of country born within the whole caste system of the British Raj, country born was very low down the ladder. A person who was born in England and came to India to work, whether as a soldier or as a civil servant or whatever, was up near the top. Those whose families had settled in India and then were born here were closer to the bottom. And those who were of mixed parentage, what we would call Anglo-Indian now, were also down near the bottom. And to me, that has always been an interesting thing because there are so many fascinating individuals who came from the bottom up. Jim Corbett.
Jim Corbett.
Is
You wrote
example.
I think this is the novel you wrote about Jim Corbett,
Yes,
right?
yes,
It's-
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. And he was country born, or country bottled, as they said.
Right. So you do see yourself in these works.
I'd like to see myself in the work. I mean, I think that it's not autobiography by any stretch of the imagination, but I think my first novel was all about identity and questioning identity. One of the things that has fascinated me over the years, and the reason I like to write espionage, is because espionage novels are all about identity. Who is the spy? Who does he work for, or she work for? When the mask comes off, who is it going to be? And espionage novels have a wonderful sense of fluid identity, uncertain identities. And I think that's something that appeals to me. And in an espionage novel, it gives you so much scope to play with this question of who am I, where do I belong, where do I come from?
So is the spy thriller your favorite format?
I wouldn't say my favorite format, but it's certainly one that I keep going back to. And I always enjoyed reading Graham Greene, John Le Carre, Eric Ambler. These were authors that I read, from my teens onward. And they were books that, in a sense, I took them seriously. They were entertainments, but I enjoyed reading them. And so trying to emulate some of the things that those authors do has always been like a goal for me.
Like this one, Bird Watching. Again, it's a bit of a spy thriller. Great game, spy thriller.
Rataban Betrayal,
Rataban
definitely
a spy thriller.
a spy thriller.
Now, while it's fiction, you do come across some real characters in them, historical figures. The places are real. So you almost get a feeling that the incidents must also have been real or could have been real or they sound realistic. Now, what gives you so much of insight into that world?
Well, you have to do research. I mean, people think sometimes with a novel, you don't have to do any research, that it just comes off the top of your head. And some novels are like that. But a novel like Bird Watching, which is set in 1962 with the China conflict and the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis, the height of the Cold War, I had to do a lot of research on that. And it was very interesting. I enjoyed the research for that. So I had characters like John Kenneth Galbraith, who was the US ambassador at that time. He wrote a wonderful book called An Ambassador's Journal, which is a day-to-day account of his time when he was ambassador here in Delhi. That book gave me a lot of information about that particular period. And so as I was reading that, I was making up the story that then I lay down on top of those facts and on top of those places that exist. And for me, I think that's fun. I mean, in The Greatest Game, Mountbatten steps into the picture.
Exactly.
And I didn't plan it that way. But as I was writing it, I thought to myself, well, why not?
Yeah.
Let him appear.
Right. And one thing fascinating is that the characters speak the language that comes very easily to them. Say, only a very rooted author can write Akkar Bakkar Bombay Boss in Abbe Pure Saw. There's something I remember from my childhood while playing in the streets.
Right.
Now, where did you get that from?
That comes from my childhood, because we played kabaddi, we played guli danda. These sort of rhymes were something that were part of our childhood. And some of them are very rude rhymes that I can't repeat here. Other ones are ones that, I grew up with. When we used to play kabaddi, for example, we wouldn't just say kabaddi, kabaddi, kabaddi. We would say chu kabaddi al tal tere muche lal lal. And then you would have these sort of rhymes that you used in that way. So as a child, you absorb the language, you absorb the dialect, you absorb the rhythms from whichever part of India it is that you grow up in. I was in Western Uttar Pradesh, in a small town called Eta,
Yes.
And then in Mussoorie, of course, in that way.
You have written in a book of yours that Hindustani and English were your mother tongues. Yes. So you meant Hindustani and English separately, or a mixture of the two that you spoke?
I went back and forth. At home with my parents, I was speaking English. But most of the day I was out of the house with my friends. So Hindustani, Hindi, whatever it was that we were speaking, was really my first language. It was only when I went to school and had to sort of put my nose in books that English really took precedence over Hindi in that way.
तो हिंदी आप बोल लेते हैं अच्छी तरह से?
थोड़ी बहुत बोल लेते हैं.
तो ये मीर और गालिब भी पढ़ा आपने? आपकी किताब में मैंने मीर को पढ़ा. दिल्ली जो एक शहर था आलम में इंतखाब, रहते थे मुंतखबी जहाँ रोज़गार के, उसको फलक ने लूट के वीरान कर दिया, हम रहने वाले हैं उसी उजड़े दयार के. तो ये शौक़ आपको रहा?
शौक़ इतना नहीं है. जैसे मेरे भाई साहब टॉम, उन्होंने तो उर्दू सालों से सीखा ना, एंड शायरी भी उनको अच्छी तरह से आती थी. मैं तो किताबों में से चुन चुन के डाल देता हूँ अपनी किताबों में, बट थोड़ी बहुत मैं याद रखता हूँ.
याद रखते हैं जी. आपने टॉम वॉल्टर साहब का जिक्र किया
जी,
तो वो आपके भाई हैं, कज़न हैं आप?
कज़न ब्रदर
हैं. तो उनका सिनेमा आपको पसंद आया? कौन सी फिल्म में रोल उनका आपको अच्छा लगा?
कई फिल्म देखी थी. उनके जो पहली फिल्म थी वो चरस थी. तो चरस हमने देखा था. मैं तो उस टाइम मैं सोचता 16 साल का था, 18 साल का था. तो हम सब गए थे उसे देखने. तो उसमें हम कहते थे, हम उनको छेड़ते थे हम थोड़ी बहुत कि आप तो धर्मेंद्र के बॉस हैं उसमें. और उसके बाद शतरंज के खिलाड़ी.
जी बिल्कुल.
वो मुझे उसकी अभी तक 2-3 बार देखी है मैंने. और कई फिल्में हैं उनके. राम तेरी गंगा मैली उसमें भी थे. तो और फिर टीवी पे जुबान संभाल के ऐसे ऐसे शोज थे. तो अभी भी देखते रहते हैं. यूट्यूब पे तो दिखता रहता है.
जी बिल्कुल.
जी
बिल्कुल. मुझे याद है ख़ास तौर पर शतरंज के खिलाड़ी, चूँकि उसमें वो जनरल आउटरम को शायरी सुना रहे हैं.
जी.
तो उस वक्त भी बचपन में देखी थी मैंने फिल्म. मैंने उस वक्त भी महसूस किया कि उनका तलफ़ुज़ प्रोनाउंसिएशन बहुत दुरुस्त था, बहुत दुरुस्त था, बहुत बहुत सही था। तो बड़ी खूबी थी उनमें।
नहीं, और उन्होंने भी, जब मैंने ये रातबान बिट्रेल लिखा था तो उसमें एक गालिब की भी कपलेट है छोटी सी, तो मैंने उसको ट्रांसलेट किया था। तो जब उन्होंने पढ़ा था तो उन्होंने कहा बाकी तो सब ठीक है मगर ये गलत है, ये आपने ठीक से ट्रांसलेट नहीं किया है।
अच्छा।
तो ही देन करेक्टेड मी इन दैट वे।
हिंदी फिल्मों का शौक आपको भी रहा?
शौक है, अभी तक मैं कभी कभी देखता हूँ। एक ज़माने में मैंने थोड़ा ज़्यादा देखे क्योंकि मैं एक किताब लिख रहा था।
अच्छा।
तो हिंदी फिल्मों के ऊपर, बॉलीवुड के ऊपर। तो उस टाइम क्या हुआ था कि दिन में मैं 2-3 फिल्म देखते रहता था, मतलब डीवीडी पे देखता रहता था। तो आई ओवरडोज्ड एट अ सर्टेन पॉइंट ऑन दैट। और बट अभी भी मैं देखता हूँ, शौक है। जब अच्छी पिक्चर आती है तो मैं ज़रूर देख लेता हूँ।
आपके किताब में जिक्र है, और ज़ाहिर है आपकी ज़िंदगी का शुरुआती दौर रहा होगा कि वहाँ सड़कों पर आप लोग गाना गाया करते थे, ज़िंदगी एक सफ़र है सुहाना।
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल।
तो आपको शुरू से शौक़ है?
स्कूल में तो थी शौक, क्योंकि हमारे मसूरी में तो करीबन 6 पिक्चर हॉल थे उस टाइम, और ज़्यादातर वहाँ पर हिंदी पिक्चर देखते थे। 1-2 थे जहाँ इंग्लिश पिक्चर देखते थे। तो वीकेंड पे तो हम जब भी जाते थे तो एक ना एक पिक्चर तो देखनी थी हमने। यहाँ पर अगर हाउसफुल है तो कोई और भी देख लेते थे। तो मुझे याद है जो पहली हिंदी फिल्म मैंने देखी थी वो थी हीर रांझा, राजकुमार।
जी। चेतनानंद डायरेक्टर थे?
चेतनानंद हो सकता है, मुझे ठीक याद नहीं है उसका।
जो मुझे याद आता है कि वो ऐसी पहली फिल्म मैंने देखी थी जिसके डायलॉग जो हैं वो कविता में थे।
हाँ, राइट।
जहाँ तक मुझे याद है, the dialogues were in poetry.
ओके,
That's what I remember from that movie.
आई थिंक सो, या नहीं, मुझे पूरी याद आती है उस फिल्म की, क्योंकि पहली हिंदी फिल्म वो थी जो मैंने देखी थी। उसके बाद कई देखे थे, आनंद, राजेश खन्ना
जी।
एंड
अमिताभ बच्चन।
बहुत
जी
पहले की पिक्चर।
जी।
वो भी हम सब अपने क्लास के साथ गए थे, हम उसे देखने।
अच्छा।
देखने गए थे।
तो पढ़ाई आपकी
मसूरी में वुडस्टॉक स्कूल।
वुडस्टॉक। और जैसा कि आपने किताब में लिखा है, पैदाइश भी आपकी लैंडोर की है, मसूरी की, लैंडोर की। तो आप अमेरिकी मूल के हैं, ओरिजिनली अमेरिकन है, लेकिन आपका ज़्यादा वक्त हिंदुस्तान में ही गुजरा।
ज़्यादातर तो मैं यहीं हिंदुस्तान में रहा। मेरे दादा दादी 1916 में आए थे, तो 100 साल से ऊपर हो गया है।
जी।
पिताजी श्रीनगर कश्मीर में उनकी पैदाइश हुई, और वो भी ज़्यादातर यहीं हिंदुस्तान में रहे। तो एक तरफ से तो हमारी फैमिली 100 साल से ऊपर इंडिया में है।
जी। आपसे पिछली 2 पीढ़ियाँ वो उनका ताल्लुक चर्च से था।
जी।
वो मिशनरी थे।
जी।
जितना आपकी किताब को पढ़ के मैंने समझा, धर्म के प्रति आपका बहुत रुझान नहीं था, बल्कि मुझे ऐसा अंदाज़ा हुआ कि आपका झुकाव प्रकृति की तरफ ज़्यादा था। बल्कि अगर मैं ढूंढूं जो शब्द आपके थे, नेचर इज़ मोर प्रोफाउंड देन एनी सिस्टम ऑफ बिलीव्स।
Yeah, I mean, for me, before I wrote that sentence, I had also was not a believer, in the sense that I've always said in several of my books that I'm an atheist. But I'm not an atheist in the sense that I reject other people's beliefs. For me, it's not something that has ever been there. कोशिश भी की मैंने. But I'm absolutely fascinated with gestures of faith, whether it's pilgrimage, whether it is mythology, whether it is folklore, all of these things, which in a sense try to explain something larger than ourselves. So that to me is something very profound. But I always say I approach it not through faith, but through doubt. So I'm questioning what it is. And as a writer, you have a critical gaze on things. So for instance, when I went on pilgrimage to Kailash, I went as a pilgrim. I went with a group of pilgrims and did the parikrama or the Kora there. There were Hindus, Buddhists, everyone was there. I went trying to understand what it was that took those people on that journey. Even though for myself it was not something that I would say I was religiously inclined towards. But I'm fascinated by that because it's obviously something that's very powerful for other people. And I like to try to understand that.
Like to bring to your attention your sentence about the Himalayas. It's a very fascinating.
आज आप जो पढ़ रहे हैं मैं भूल गया हूँ मगर आपने चुन चुन के ढूंढ लिया.
देखिए ये इन किताबों की आपकी किताब की खूबियां हैं कि ये मुझे याद रहा
और मैं भूल गया मगर आपको याद आ रहा.
शुक्रिया, बहुत शुक्रिया. This is from All the Way to Heaven. For me, the Himalayas represent the overpowering presence of nature, which could never be confined within the narrow boundaries of religion. How did you arrive at this?
Because the Himalaya, in a sense, for me, certainly, it's a landscape that is so full of stories. It's a living landscape. So there are stories from biology, there are stories from geology, there are stories from hydrology. So the scientific narratives are there. Then on top of that, you have the folklore and the legends of the people that live in the Himalaya. And then on top of that, you have the mythology that various faiths have put on it. And so the interpretation of a particular mountain is given significance in Hindu religion, Buddhism, and Islam, not so much in Christianity, but perhaps in some places there. So people have laid each of these stories on top. The scientists tell us one thing. The people that live in the mountains tell us one thing. The different religions that are located within the Himalayan landscape tell us one thing. And then you have your own personal stories that are there. So for me, it's not just, Kailash, of course, is a iconic mountain, and it means a great deal to people of certain faiths. But I see it as something that is larger than that, because as I look at it, the geology, the geography of that particular region, the Trans-Himalayan region, there are so many fascinating things. The fact that 4 great rivers of South Asia all have their source within 50 kilometers of Kailash is spectacular. The Indus, the Satluj, the Karnali, and the Brahmaputra, or the Sangpo, as it's called. They all start near Kailash. So geographically, you are getting this tremendous landscape that has so many different stories attached to it. So that for me as a pilgrim, or as a wanderer, or as a writer, whatever it is that I go there, I'm trying to weave these stories together in some sort of way so that for my readers, I can try to concoct a compelling narrative in that way.
So, belonging to the kind of family that you did, were they unsettled by the way you approached an organized faith?
I'm often asked, were your parents disappointed that you're an atheist? And the interesting thing is, it was never a question that I would have asked them. Because generally speaking, they were very secular. They were Christians, they were devout. My father was an ordained minister. But their interest was more in interfaith dialogue, understanding other people's perspectives. So for me, I came from a very secular background. And secularism was something that we sort of absorbed through our skin in one way or the other.
A short while ago, we spoke about cinema and how you got interested in it. You also written a book on cinema.
Yes, I have. I did. It's got two titles. One is Going for Take, and the other is Fantasies of a Bollywood Love Thief. But essentially what it is a book about the making of Vishal Bhardwaj's film Omkara.
Okay.
And I followed the making right from the beginning when they started writing the script through the entire process until the film was released. And it was a wonderful experience. Vishal was very kind to me and allowed me to be a fly on the wall through that entire process. And so it was a great experience all the way around.
Did it give you an insight into the way Bollywood worked?
I think so. I mean, it was also being made at a very interesting time in the sense that you were moving from celluloid to digital. And so, in fact, that film was shot on celluloid, but then it was digitized. And what we saw on the screen at the end was a digital production. So technologically, there was a lot happening at that particular time. I got to watch the production process there, but also that creative process of a director like Vishal Bhardwaj putting together so many different elements, from the music to the dialogue to the visual effects, and the way in which that came together over the course of the 6 months or so that he was shooting was, for me, absolutely fascinating.
एक छोटा रोल भी आपने निभाया?
ओमकारा में नहीं, ओमकारा में आई वाज जस्ट अ फ्लाई ऑन द वॉल. उसके बाद उन्होंने जो हैदर फिल्म बनाई थी कश्मीर में, तो मुझे मालूम था कि हैदर वाज इज अ रीमेक ऑफ हैमलेट, शेक्सपियर हैमलेट. तो एक दिन विशाल का फ़ोन आया तो उन्होंने कहा चलो श्रीनगर चलो. मैंने कहा आता हूँ. करीबन 10-15 साल से मैं श्रीनगर नहीं गया था. तो मैंने कहा ठीक है मैं चलता हूँ, टिकट भेजोगे तो मैं आ जाऊँगा. एंड जब मैं पहुँचा उसने कहा छोटी सी रोल है आपके लिए. तो मैंने कहा ठीक है कर लेता हूँ. एंड देन ही टोल्ड मी दैट आपको जर्नलिस्ट का रोल लेना पड़ेगा. सो आई थोड़ा रुक के मैंने कहा मैं तो एक्टर हूँ नहीं. उसने कहा कर लो. तो आई डिड दैट. एंड उसमें अगर आप देखें, अगर आपका ध्यान अगर एक तरफ हो गया तो मैं गायब हो जाता हूँ उसमें. मतलब 3-4 सेकंड का रोल है. अगर फिर हूँ वहाँ पर.
अच्छा. विशाल ने जिस तरह से शेक्सपियर को समझा और फिर शेक्सपियर को वो एक दूसरे माध्यम पर, एक दूसरे मीडियम में, एक सिनेमा के पर्दे तक ले गए, जो प्रक्रिया थी आपने करीब से देखी, इस पर आपकी क्या राय है?
पहली बात यह है कि विशाल भारद्वाज जो हैं वो सिर्फ डायरेक्टर नहीं हैं, वो म्यूज़िक डायरेक्टर हैं, राइटर हैं, डायलॉग भी वही लिखते हैं. तो जब मैंने उनका जो फिल्म था उसको फॉलो किया था, तो उसमें शुरू में उन्होंने नरेशन दिया था अजय देवगन को और दूसरे जो एक्टर्स को. तो मुझे मालूम नहीं था कि कैसे, मतलब जो नरेशन चलेगा ये क्या चीज़ है, कैसे होता है, क्या होता है. मगर 2.5 घंटे तक वो उनको पूरी स्क्रिप्ट सुना रहे थे और उसके जो साउंड इफ़ेक्ट्स थे उसमें गाना भी डाला उन्होंने. As a director, he was doing everything. And if you see his films, there's not one part of it that he didn't have some control over. ये नहीं कि कई डायरेक्टर हैं कि उनके हाथ में स्क्रिप्ट डाल दिया, वो कहेंगे इधर से शूट करो, उधर से शूट करो, एंड बाद में कोई एडिटर आएगा वो उसके काट कूट के बना देगा. But Vishal is there from start to finish. Shakespeare, he has a completely different take on Shakespeare from what, I mean, all of us were taught Shakespeare in school at some point or the other. And whether we liked it or not is another matter. But he was able to take a play like Othello, जिसमें कितनी themes हैं, There's jealousy, there's racism, there's violence, all of these things. And उसको मतलब वेस्टर्न यूपी में डाल के उसने जो गैंगस्टर फिल्म बनाया है, you could never connect that to Shakespeare until you see that film. And जो dialogues हैं, कई dialogue हैं जो बिल्कुल straight from Shakespeare. But it's put into Hindi that you would hear on the streets of Meerut or someplace like that. So he's able to do things with Shakespeare that I don't think anybody has ever done before. Maqbool was the first film that I saw, and that was with Irfan and Tabu. It was a spectacular film. And Omkara was the second one, and फिर Haider तीसरी थी उसमें.
ये तो आपके विशाल और रेखा ये आपके पड़ोसी भी हैं एक तरह से.
जी, वो मसूरी आते रहते हैं. उनका घर है मसूरी में. कभी कभी हम टेनिस भी खेल लेते हैं साथ, एंड मिलते रहते हैं वहाँ.
एक सवाल आपके इस नावल के बारे में, आपकी ख्वाहिश होगी कि ये बड़े पर्दे पर आए सिनेमा के तौर पर?
हज़ारों ख्वाहिश हैं कि इसकी वजह. No, I don't think there's any author who can honestly say कि इसकी फिल्म नहीं बननी चाहिए.
जी.
कई नॉवेल्स हैं कि जिसकी फिल्म बन नहीं सकती.
जी जी,
वो तो मैं मानता हूँ. एंड कई ऑथर्स हैं वो कहेंगे कि मैंने ऐसे नॉवल लिखा है कि इसकी फिल्म कभी बनेगी नहीं.
जी.
मगर आखिर में we're professionals. गुजारा करना है. You have to somehow feed yourself. And film is where the money is. There's no, I mean, I'll be blunt about it.
Yes.
So if you sell the film rights to a book, then you've recouped your time in that way.
See, Shakespeare isn't around to allow Vishal to take liberties or to withhold permissions. But if a director approaches you, would you be very particular about the fidelity of that work of cinema?
Up to a point. I mean, in the sense that I've been approached several times. Nobody has ever made a film of my books, but they've optioned it and scripts have been written and all of that, and I've seen the scripts. So, उस प्रोसेस में तो I've told people कि ये नहीं चलेगा, ये आपने गलत interpretation किया है, and all of that sort of thing. You put your foot down. But आखिर में at a certain point you have to let go. And you have to say कि ठीक है, you do what you wish with it. Because in a sense, you as the director or the film writer or whatever it is, you're a creator also. So just as I've taken Kipling's Kim and turned him into my Kim, if somebody took my book and made it into a film, I would hope that they would add another layer to it, something that I haven't. The actor will add another layer.
While reading this book of yours, The Greatest Game, incidentally, we are right at Parliament Street,
Yes.
where you PTI. So Parliament Street figures prominently in this novel. And I think one or two crucial episodes happen on this very street. I get the feeling that you have lived in this city for some time. You know the city?
I've lived in Delhi during the 80s. I lived here for about 4 or 5 years. We were in Nizamuddin East, and then in Safdarjung development area also. So in those days, Connaught Place was easily accessible to us. The traffic wasn't as bad as it is now. And I had an old Java motorcycle. And so I would drive these streets constantly. So I know I couldn't drive today. If I was on my Java, I would be lost within about 5 minutes. But in those days, I knew Parliament Street well. I would come down, the Oxford University Press was here nearby. Connaught Place, there were various places that we would come to. So it's familiar territory.
So you lived in Delhi. Of course, you were born in Landour and you were living in Landour and Goa. Which is your hometown?
Mussoorie.
Mussoorie is your hometown. That's
Or
what,
Landour.
or Landor.
Landor is a part of Missouri. So I always say Missouri simply because I think of it, my home, as being not just Landor, but the larger hill station.
तो अब आजकल आप अपना वक्त कैसे गुजारते हैं?
किताबें लिखना पड़ती है अभी तो छोड़ा नहीं, बट ज़्यादातर गोवा में रहते हैं अब. जाड़ों में मसूरी इस उम्र में थोड़ी सी ज़्यादा ठंड लगती है, तो हम गोवा भी भाग जाते हैं.
अच्छा.
And my wife is also much happier in Goa. So people ask me, are you happy in Goa? I say my wife is happy in Goa, तो मैं भी खुश हूँ.
I see. There's a question that has to be posed to every author, that every author loves his own books. And amongst the 20 you have written, or more than 20, which is your favorite one?
Well, I always answer the last one I wrote is my favorite.
Right, okay.
That's the safest one. Then the other ones won't take offense. But no, I can honestly say writing The Greatest Game gave me a lot of pleasure, because it was able to recreate history, or a period of history. And the characters came alive quite easily, in the sense it was not an easy book to write, but it was a book that I found entertained me, and I hope will entertain my readers.
Right. And should I say that some of the books fall within the genre of historical fiction? Like even Jim Corbett, after all, his history. And when you do historical fiction, you're faced with an issue that it's a mixture of real and imagined. Do you feel obliged, or do you feel an anxiety that people might not be able to differentiate between what really happened and what was imagined?
Well, on one level, I would be delighted if they were confused. In fact, when I wrote the Jim Corbett book, one of the most gratifying reviews was where the reviewer said that he has lifted a story by Jim Corbett and put it in his book.
I see.
And in fact, it wasn't lifted. I had made it all up.
Right.
But she thought I had cut and pasted that in the book. So if there is that element of confusion, I feel I've done my job on a certain level. What you don't want with historical fiction is to make a mistake that undercuts the reality of the book in that way.
Yes.
So, for instance, if I introduce Mountbatten, if I had somehow described him as being blonde-haired instead of dark-haired, somebody would catch that.
Yes.
Or if I had described him as being a short, ungainly man, which he wasn't. He was a tall, imposing character. Those sort of things, that if I get something like that wrong, then my reader, if he or she knows the history, will then doubt everything else in the book. So you have to be accurate to a certain degree. But then you can also play with the truth in so many ways. I put Mountbatten in Shimla in May 1947. I don't know whether he was actually in Shimla at that point. I suspect he went there at some point. So somebody could do the research and tell me I got it wrong. But that sort of thing is not a problem. It's the other things that would be an obvious mistake that would then undercut in a sense, that suspension of disbelief that is there.
Right. Now, your Broad came up to 1947.
Yes.
And he's still alive. Would you take him beyond that as well?
You're asking an awkward question.
Okay, let me withdraw it.
No. It's a good question, because it's a question I asked myself, because I thought, let me bring him to 47. He ends up in the book in Kashmir. And at that point, Kashmir was not yet the borders, the lines of control, nothing had been drawn at that point. So he's still in a pre-partition world at that point. Will he go to Lahore? Will he go back to Delhi? I don't know. I doubt that I will write a sequel to my own sequel.
Right.
That I think would be trying too hard. But I like the idea that I was able to leave him in that no man's land without specifying what happens next. He's 61. He's drinking too much. He's taking too much haffine. He's not going to last a lot longer.
But he's absolutely fit, because the kind of things he does and the way he escapes, I mean, he seems to be in the pink of health.
Thank you. I'm glad I convinced you at least.
Yes, of course. Just an interesting thought that how would Kipling have seen your book? How would he have seen this book? Would he have been happy with it?
I don't think so. Because to a certain extent, and I'm not trying to make an argument about it, but I've tried to subvert some of the imperial stereotypes. Because one of the problems with Kipling is that there are an awful lot of racial stereotypes. And those put you off immediately. You know, you open the book and you start something, and then you think to yourself, this is just a racist from, the 19th century. So I think that if he was around, he probably wouldn't read it anyway. But if he did, I think he'd be offended, because there are certain characters that he portrayed as being heroic that I've portrayed. Colonel Crichton, Lurgan Saab, who's in there. These are characters that for him were very romantic characters, people that he obviously admired their personalities in that way. And I've sort of tried to cut them down to size.
You're right.
In that way.
And just a thought, if somebody else wrote a sequel to a sequel?
I wouldn't object. As long as I got 5%.
Of all the books you have written, which is the hardest one?
I think the last nonfiction book that I wrote, called The Cobra's Gaze, which was about wildlife, and I was visiting, you may not have it here in this collection, but it was going to different parts of India, to wildlife sanctuaries, national parks, tiger reserves, and then to other places like sacred groves, private land that was forested. And it was a lot of travel. And I wrote it right after COVID sort of was dying down. So I had not been traveling, and I wanted to travel. But the travel took it out of me. It was exhausting. And when I finished that book, I was relieved in that sense. I enjoyed it. I went to places that I was able to go to the Sundarbans, I was able to go to Gir, I was able to see snow leopards in Ladakh, all sorts of things that I'd wanted to do. But at the end of it, I was exhausted. And it was hard work. Because there was also a lot of research. When you're writing about wildlife and natural history, the only thing I think that's more difficult is writing about cricket. Because everybody in the country is an expert on cricket. So if I get something wrong, पकड़े जाओगे.
आपने क्रिकेट पे लिखा है क्या?
जी नहीं, मैं हिम्मत नहीं है क्रिकेट पे लिखा. But natural history or wildlife and these things, there are a lot of wonderful naturalists in India, and there's a growing population of young people who are experts on birds and things like that. And I'm always embarrassed to go out into the forest with them, because they are speaking Latin the whole time, all of the Latin names, they know everything like that. So I had to be very careful in this book to get those things correct. And that took a lot of research, and that was also exhausting in that way.
एक सवाल जो आपसे पूछना चाहते हैं कि किस वक्त पर आकर आपको लगा कि आपको एक राइटर बनना है, एक लेखक बनना है?
मैं सोचता हूँ स्कूल में जब मैं 15-16 साल का था, उस टाइम मैं छोटी छोटी कहानियाँ लिखता रहता था, कविता भी लिखता था। तो शुरू में मेरा ये ख्याल था कि मैं कवि बनूंगा, बट कॉलेज में एक क्लास लिया था मैंने, पोइट्री राइटिंग क्लास। तो उसमें जो प्रोफेसर थे, बहुत, आई मीन ही वाज द पोएट लॉरिएट ऑफ द यूएस फॉर अ व्हाइल, रिचर्ड विल्बर। तो शुरू में उन्होंने ये बोला था कि इस क्लास में हम आपको कविता लिखना हम नहीं सिखाएंगे, मगर हम ये बताएंगे कि आगे आप लिखोगे कि नहीं लिखोगे कविता। तो उस क्लास के बाद मैंने कविता लिखना छोड़ दिया था।
अच्छा।
एंड प्रोज लिखना शुरू कर दिया था। तो उस टाइम से मैं अपने को शॉर्ट स्टोरी फिक्शन राइटर समझता था। तो शुरू में जो पहली जो 4 किताबें थी वो सब फिक्शन थे। उसके बाद फिर नॉन फिक्शन लिखना शुरू किया था। बट धीरे धीरे, मतलब 15-16 साल से लेके मैं सोचता हूँ, जब तक मेरी पहली किताब छपी थी, 21 साल का था मैं, उस टाइम मैं सोच रहा था कि अब हाँ मैं कह सकता हूँ मैं राइटर हूँ। मगर बीच में जैसे 8-10 साल तक मैंने कुछ नहीं छापा। तो उस टाइम मैं सोचता था कि मैं हूँ राइटर कि नहीं। तो यू आर ऑलवेज इन डाउट, यू आर ऑलवेज इन डाउट, एंड a writer lives on the edge of doubt.
I think for many years, for long years, you have been a full-time writer. Um, is it tough?
It's tough. For a number of years, I also taught writing because I think you have to be a real best-selling and a sustained best-selling author to be able to support yourself through writing anywhere in the world. I mean, any author will tell you that. So I found that teaching was complemented my writing. The nice thing about teaching is that as a writer, you spend time alone at a desk, whereas when you're teaching, you're with a group of young people who, in a sense, give you new perspectives on the world, and that interaction with them and then with your colleagues and all. So I taught for about 18 years to support myself, but also because I think it was an important alternative to sitting alone at a desk looking at a laptop screen and trying to figure out what am I going to do next.
तो शुरुआती दौर में ऐसे कौन से लेखक थे, कौन से राइटर्स थे जो आपको पसंद थे या जिनका आप पर असर पड़ा, जिनका आपकी लेखनी पर, आपकी राइटिंग पर असर पड़ा?
शुरू में मतलब 2-3 राइटर्स थे जो मैं जब 12-13 साल का था उस टाइम में पढ़ता था। एक तो आर.के. नारायण, उसकी जो कहानियाँ थी, मैलगुडी की जो कहानियाँ थी, हमें मतलब स्कूल में वो टेक्स्ट बुक भी थे, और एक तरफ से वो बड़ी सरल कहानियाँ थी। तो उस उम्र में उनको पढ़ के मैं सोचता था कि हाँ मैं भी ऐसे शायद कोशिश करता हूँ, शायद लिख सकता हूँ। उसके बाद दूसरे राइटर्स भी आ गए सामने। खुशवंत सिंह, ट्रेन टू पाकिस्तान, वो भी मैं सोचता, मैं 15-16 साल का था जब मैंने पढ़ा था। उस टाइम पूरी समझ में नहीं आई, बट फिर बाद में दोबारा पढ़ा, तीसरी बार पढ़ा तो थोड़ा बहुत उसमें समझ आई, और मैं सोचता हूँ ग्रेटेस्ट गेम में थोड़ी बहुत उसकी असर पड़ी है।
Are you tech savvy in the sense, can I ask a question about AI?
You can ask me. I'm not tech savvy to the point that I don't know whether it's Chat GPT or Chat GTP, but I can answer a question about it.
Have you ever used it? No, you haven't. Does AI interest you, and do you think it's a challenge to creative authors?
For myself personally, I'm not interested in AI, and I'm not likely to use it. Partly because I think that when I write, essentially I'm thinking on the page. So I don't want somebody else thinking for me in that way. What worries me about AI more than anything is that in India, in the United States, wherever it is, there are a lot of good books that get published, But for every good book, there are usually about 10 mediocre books that get published, or maybe more. And unfortunately, I think AI is going to feed that animal. And there are a lot of sort of popular books, but books that are really of very poor quality. And so almost anybody who is tech savvy and able to put together a story can feed, as I understand it, feed it into their laptop and come out with a text that's grammatically correct and theek hai, chalta hai. But it's not going to be good literature. I can guarantee you that.
आपको अपनी किताबों के अलावा औरों की किताबें भी पसंद आती होंगी, तो आप ऐसे कौन से ऑथर हैं, ऐसे कौन से लेखक हैं जो आपको पसंद हैं?
गीतांजलि श्री की जो किताब 2 साल पहले बुकर प्राइज 2 साल या 3 साल पहले शायद टूम ऑफ सैंड, हिंदी में तो रेत समाधि थी जी, मुझे वो किताब बड़ी अच्छी लगी। इंग्लिश में पढ़ी थी मैंने, हिंदी में तो नहीं पढ़ी है। मगर मैं पढ़ता ना, जो मैं किताब मेरे सामने आती है, मैं कई किताबें जो मैं पूरी नहीं पढ़ लेता, एक तरफ कर देता हूँ। But I read a lot. And whether it's a mixture of detective fiction, John Banville detective stories, V.S. Naipaul की किताबें तो मैं पढ़ते रहता हूँ जी। हर 3-4 साल बाद खोल लेता हूँ, पढ़ लेता हूँ।
तो आपने एक फिल्म में जर्नलिस्ट का रोल निभाया है और आप पीटीआई में मौजूद हैं। आप हमसे कोई सवाल पूछना चाहेंगे?
उसमें मैंने, विशाल भाई ने मुझे रोल तो दिया था जर्नलिस्ट का, मगर कोई सवाल तो मैंने पूछा नहीं उसमें। मैं बस जवाब देते रहा। बट नहीं, जब मैं आया था, मैं ताजुब कर रहा था क्योंकि 30-35 साल पहले मैं आया था पीटीआई में, और उस टाइम बिल्कुल फर्क, एक स्क्रीन भी नहीं था। मैं सोचता हूँ
जी, सब
अपने डेस्क पे तो बैठे थे, मगर अब जब मैं आया था इतने स्क्रीन में तो देखे भी नहीं है। मैं सोचता हूँ 100-150 स्क्रीन, हर स्क्रीन में कुछ अलग अलग जी इमेजेस, टेक्स्ट जी, स्टोरीज दूसरे
बिल्कुल। और
तो मैं ये सवाल पूछा आपसे, हाउ डू यू चूज द स्टोरीज दैट यू पुट फॉरवर्ड इन दैट वे?
वेल, I think it's a good question to pose to a journalist. Let me try to answer. 2 things largely, or should I put it this way, public interest. And we say it should be in public interest and of public interest. If you have that filter in mind, you won't go wrong. जैसे हिंदी में अगर कहें तो जनहित और जन रुचि दोनों ही चीज़ें होनी चाहिए। अगर ये 2 चीज़ें हैं तो फिर आप ऐसी खबर लोगों को दे रहे हैं जो उनके लिए रेलेवेंट है, प्रासंगिक है। आप यहाँ आए, आपका बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया। और हमारी ख्वाहिश है, हमारी कामना है कि आप और बहुत सारी किताबें लिखें। किम का इसके बाद क्या होगा, ये इसकी हम कल्पना करते रहेंगे। शायद कभी आपको ख्वाहिश हो, आपकी ख्वाहिश हो लिखने की, आप भी लिखेंगे। लेकिन अगर आपने नहीं लिखा तब भी हम सोचेंगे कि किम ने इसके बाद क्या किया। लेकिन आप इसके बाद क्या करेंगे, इस पर हमारी नज़र हमेशा रहेगी। बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया आपका।
आपकी बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया। एंड आपने मुझे बुलाया तो मुझे बड़ी खुशी हुई यहाँ पहुँच के और आपसे बात करके। थैंक यू।